are advising financial institutions on issues related to aging and vulnerable investors, advising commercial fiduciaries on issues of mental capacity and estate law, the creation and operation of commercial trusts, charities, estate planning, and administration. He also has a growing mediation practice focused on estate, trust, and guardianship disputes. Arthur is a popular speaker, that goes without saying, and writer, and is currently a member of the OSC's Seniors Expert Advisory Committee. Arthur, it's all yours. Just one housekeeping note I forgot to mention. If somebody found a gold ring, please bring it to the IFB booth. Thank you. So sorry.
Thank you very much, Marie-Josée. Nancy, will you give me the high sign when I've got 5 minutes left? Good afternoon, everyone. It is always a pleasure to be here and see so many old friends and have the opportunity to make some new ones and have a whole bunch of people tell me I haven't changed at all, which I know is a complete untruth, but it's really nice of you to straighten it out. So we're going to be talking about a fairly dark topic today, abuse, cybercrime, and fraud. And I've avoided dealing with the abuse topic with this audience for a couple of reasons. One was I felt that we were coming at it anyhow with a lot of the things we've talked about over the years, especially powers of attorney and joint ownership, and it always came into the questions, and even today, as I was waiting here, people were asking me questions that point towards concerns about abuse. I stayed away, so I felt we were covering it anyhow, and I stayed away from it also because when you delve into the writing about it, there's a big problem defining it. But there's not actual agreement or a consensus about what counts as abuse of older people, so I felt like I was wading into turbulent waters. I've deliberately tried to cut it down to size and focus on the aspects of abuse that are most likely to show up in my professional life or yours. So if you're looking at it, you're thinking, but he's not talking about this, that, or the other thing. It's true, I'm not, but I've tried to hone in on what I think actually matters and use the first part of the presentation, which focuses on abuse, to kind of tie together a bunch of topics that we've spoken about in the past. And I want to bring abuse home in a way to the two tools we have to encourage our clients, friends, and family to protect themselves. And those are the continuing power of attorney for property and the appointment of a trusted contact person. And I frankly don't care whether your primary business is in insurance or your primary business is in securities. On both sides, I've been suggesting for over a decade, I think, that people use something like a trusted contact person, with just someone who's appointed, who you have your client's permission to call and divulge information to if you think there may be a problem. And I'm finding in practice that if you do it, it heads off about 80% of what would otherwise be the kinds of problems where you might have to call someone and even pay someone to guide you through what you're seeing. Cybercrime was actually cybercrime and fraud, so third-party crime, not from people's families, not originating with people's relatives or friends, is becoming enormous. And to be honest, although it's surfaced in my practice from time to time, I was unaware until about a year ago of just how huge a problem it is and how targeted it is at the aging population, at seniors. And that's actually what's driving this presentation, because the more I got into it, the more I understood about it, the more I felt a kind of urgent need to bring what I was seeing in my own practice and learning from others to this audience. Because it turns out there's an awful lot that we can do to protect ourselves and protect our family members and protect our clients. I see people taking notes, which is great. The slides will, as always, be available on the IFB website. And you'll notice a bit different with this presentation is a little bit more research-based than my typical presentation. So as I came across particular articles or reports that I thought were helpful, I've inserted the URL It's all available online into the slides, and there's a couple of slides at the end that just give you links to online resources if you're interested in the topic and want to know more about it. Now, when I say urgent, let me tell you what happened when I started to explore the topic as a kind of background. So the cybercrime issue, first I started to get more calls from my own clients in the financial services world where their customers were being victimized by cyber criminals. And some of that was giving rise to liability or threatened liability along the lines of, you never should have allowed her to make that transfer. And so I thought, well, I convene a series in my own workplace focused on aging investors. And I thought I'll do that topic. But before I got there, I did a session for IFB at our offices. And I moderated the panel, and I asked a geriatric psychiatrist, so are you seeing issues with fraud and cybercrime? And she smiled, and she said, it's a pet topic, and I actually have developed a liaison relationship with the Toronto Police Service because the majority of my older patients have been the victims of cybercrime. And then it turned out that there's actually an officer on the staff, on the chief staff for the Toronto Police Service, who was a geriatric social worker, now a police officer, who spends all of his time dealing with these issues. And a lot of what he does actually is come out to groups and talk, because the incidence is so high, the police can't possibly stay on top of or investigate all of it. So the focus is on what I'm hoping to do for you today, which is to say, look, it's a problem, and let's do what we can to protect ourselves and protect our clients and customers. Let me ask you, two other things happened. One was two members, not immediate blood relatives, but people in the family circle, fell victim to cybercrime. One of them, it was a real near thing. The bank and his daughter found out about it and stopped them from transferring $25,000 to someone who would have stolen it. He was mad. Just mad. How dare you think I would have done it? I never actually would have done it. Who are you to interfere in my life? Bah, 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 bah. And he then took the story to another member of the family, a couple years older than him, expecting he was going to get commiseration. And yeah, those nosy Parkers, what business did they have? And what he got instead was a quiet question. Did you send the money? He said, no, I didn't. He said, well, you're lucky because I did. So, and then once I was presenting it at work, I couldn't go for a coffee without getting harassed. People in the place knew that we were doing the topic, and people would just grab me by the elbow when I'd just be sitting for a moment trying to clear my head before going back to work, and they'd want to tell me with great urgency about what had happened or almost happened to mother, father, uncle, and the lovely lady next door whose snow they clear. So let me ask you, how many of you have had the experience of having either a family member or a client fall victim either to financial abuse by family or cybercrime or fraud? I'm going to guess it's about 2/3 of the room. So take your measure by that. So I'm using two terms to distinguish two things. Financial abuse. Now, I emphasize the financial because, as I've said, all kinds of definitions of elder abuse out there, some of which are convincing, some of which I think are way too broad to actually be helpful to anybody. But what I want to hone in on here is abuse that shows up in the assets you're managing or the decisions that people bring to my office. And I've given you, let's talk about how it shows, because people often will think things maybe a little bit suspicious, but they're reluctant to say, no, that's suspicious enough that I need to ask some more questions or maybe do something about it. So abuse, threats of harm or harmful conduct to pressure an older person to financially benefit someone else. That can include omission. And so I'm not going to do your shopping for you, or I'm not going to pick your medication up from the pharmacy, or I'm not going to come visit you unless you give me some money or give my kids some money. The other thing I want to highlight there, and this is something you've heard me talk about before, and this is not in the literature, it's sort of my summary, or a summary of my own experience dealing with the issue, and that is what I call innocent versus advertent abuse, both of which are wrong. I mean, it's never right to take assets or property from an older person who may need it for herself and use it for your own benefit. But sometimes people do it without realizing that it's wrong. And I'll come back to that distinction between innocent and advertent abuse. And it matters because we need to be careful that we don't, without meaning to, accidentally counsel innocent abuse. So here's some of the signs that you're looking for. There's tons of stuff online. As I went through the literature, I just tried to pick up the things that I thought were most helpful to practicing lawyers and people selling financial products or services. Here's the big one at the top, which is the person says that they're being abused. And this comes up again and again in the literature and in talking to people, that someone will go say to a doctor or say to a nurse or say to a social worker, someone's taking advantage of me, and they won't be believed or they won't be listened to. So the starting point, and now that can be difficult because often in the early stages of dementia, illnesses like Alzheimer's disease, people will become irrationally paranoid and start to say that things are being stolen from them. So you need to be careful before you get on your white charger and mount a crusade. But when someone says that they're being abused financially, listen to them and start out by giving them the benefit of the doubt. There's other things that will often tell you something's gone wrong. And this I see with the files. I'm not a litigator myself, but a fair number of litigation files I'm first contact for. And one of the patterns is that someone who everybody knows has enough money to live the life they've usually lived, all of a sudden they're saying, but I don't have enough money to go on vacation this year. Or I don't have enough money to use Uber. Or I gave up my membership in because I don't have enough money. And then the question is, what's happening to the money? And especially if you see someone going without necessity, so they're hungry, they're just not eating enough. And then the big one in our world, unexplained withdrawals. Right? All of a sudden, a person who you've got a pretty good track record with, who you know well, who's always had a fairly consistent burn rate, all of a sudden starts to withdraw large sums of money and isn't able to give you a cogent or convincing explanation for why they're doing it. Some of what I gave you there is a summary. The single best thing I found was actually on an OSC website, and I've given you the URL for the whole document at the bottom of the slide. I want to highlight here the bottom bullet, because when we're talking about abuse as distinct from cybercrime and fraud, so abuse is happening if people's own relatives or friends who are taking advantage of them, I would say the single biggest source of trouble on the financial services side, so the calls I'm getting from people who are working in the financial services industry, is the misuse of powers of attorney. And so let me ask, how many people have seen that happen in either in your own life or in your practice, where the attorney for property is using someone else's money for their own benefit? Probably about a quarter of the room. So that's distinct from fraud and cybercrime. So abuse is an in-house business. Until about 3 years ago, everything I was reading was saying that if you're looking at financial crimes against the elderly, the majority of them were perpetrated by their own friends or family members. 3 years ago, that switched over, and I started to read that, in fact, the biggest source of trouble was outside criminals, third parties. And as I said, that's actually what's driving this presentation, I don't know that I'd have come and talked just